For the past couple of years, my partners in being pirates, and I'm going to explain why pirates is important in a moment, and I have been on an exploration into where we are as humanity, as a species. How did we get here? But most importantly, where should we go? Where could we go? And we've had many conversations with many people that have immersed themselves and dedicated their life to really deeply understanding this from all sorts of different perspectives. What you're seeing here is basically the outline of the permanent brain dominance instruments that was developed by General Electric in the 80s to identify the best possible team configuration between the different modes of operation of our brain. And we take care to always include all of them. So whichever strength you have in this, I'm pretty sure that you find yourself found here. Why pirates? Because pirates had to operate with scarcity. There's some very nice book by Sam Conniff about this. They had to invent new things on the fringes of society. They actually came up with models of democracy. They came up with health insurance. They came up with pension. They had female and people of color as captains long, long before that even was considered or a possibility in the rest of the world. We also have to operate on with scarcity still at the moment as we are in a transition between phases. And this transition is a transition between phases of civilizations that have been observed in the past. And there's a possibility that we are currently experiencing a similar situation. So after a period of stability and early growth, the first entrepreneurs, the first doers, builders, building civilization, moving into prosperity for all, and then overshooting the environment that the civilization finds itself in, which is then met by hubris. Finally, the pressure yields, totalitarianism breaks down, and there's a new emergence. And there are different ways of looking at this circle. Typical ways could be the boom-bust cycle of species. So we differentiate between K and R selected species, the one continuously exploiting their environment until the exploited environment cannot provide the given population with an environment for thriving anymore, population breaks down. That's a boom-bust cycle. Our selected species are about being in tune with the environment. The real question here is, because this has happened before to numerous civilizations on our planet, but never before, at least not that we know of, in a global way. Now, this is of crucial importance that we manage to shift from one modality to another. Another way of seeing this comes from the innovation cycles in technology. Basically, you could see these as stacked S curves. There's an exponential growth phase, and after that exponential growth phase, you're met with a new paradigm that slowly eases in, that looks almost ridiculous in the beginning, and then moves into a new powerful response to something that is needed. So just to draw the analogy, if we're looking at compute, we had machines doing compute. The first ever computer by Ada Lovelace was the actual thing that you need to churn. That was replaced by tubes, and tubes were replaced by the integrated circuits that we know of today. And each time this happened, this was not really foreseeable, and it was a deep paradigmatic shift. And this is what we're talking about here today, but on a global and civilization level perspective. So collapse, saying goodbye to something that we have grown accustomed to, always comes with a some level of grief. And grief comes in different stages. They're actually not sequential, they're messy and interchanging. And I find myself sometimes in anger, and sometimes in depression, but more often I find myself in acceptance and beyond acceptance, even in moving into into a new thing. So if you take a moment to reflect on where you might find yourself given the current situation that you know of on our planet, then feel into which of these stages of grief, these feelings of grief you might be in at the moment, because that'll dictate how you interpret what you're going to hear. Please bear that in mind, because it will shift how you listen. And before I finally go into what we're talking about, I want to invoke the Stockdale paradox. It's named after Jim Stockdale, who was the highest ranking military person in the Vietnam War, US military person in the Vietnam War that was a prisoner of war in North Vietnam for about 8 years. During his time, he observed a very interesting thing. The co-prisoners that were optimistic that they would be freed very soon eventually died of despair because they ran out of hope. Every time as a moment of possible release passed, they would lose a little bit of hope. But he also observed that the pessimists died, effectively for the same reason, just with a shortcut. And then finally, he observed that those who made it through were able to hold two things at the same time. One was a ruthless, realistic assessment of the current situation, and at the same time, a radically optimistic perspective on the long term. So I'd invite you to put that idea on top of whatever stage of the grief cycle you're in, to hold those two elements. So this thing that we're in, that this stuckness that we might feel, and the hopeless running in a circle that we might feel, is not unique to us. It happens to the best of species. For example, ants. Ants organize by following pheromones. And sometimes it happens that ants follow pheromones back into their own path, creating a cycle that they hardly can escape. They walk in circles of a few meters or even a few hundred meters until they die of exhaustion because they never arrive at their destination. And when I first heard this story, I was reminded of how I feel in the current situation of our predicament as humanity. And ours looks slightly more complex than just a circle. And I want to, for the sake of being on the same page, allow us to go through the synthesis that we have learned from the many conversations with all of those amazing thinkers that we've had the opportunity to speak with over the last couple of years. And for those of the people that helped us understand this, you'll probably recognize your thinking here, and I want to thank you. But the list of people who contributed to this is just too long to be mentioned here. But if you ask me, I will happily point to the people. So what does the sapiens mill look like? Well, at one point, we started creating money, and the design of our currency currently is such that we create money exponentially. So M3, the sum of all liquid assets on the planet, doubles every 10 years. Now, doubling in a fixed time frame always is an exponential growth path. Now, since roughly 50 years, 52 to be exact, we are backing this exponential growth of our token by our GDP, because we want to be sure that tomorrow we can use the same amount of token to buy a salad, or that the inflation that makes the salad more expensive over time is such that we can deal with it. So GDP grows also at an exponential rate, doubling every 20 years globally, roughly. Now, if you look closely at what we actually do when we look at GDP, you will notice that it's essentially about moving atoms. We're producing stuff, we're servicing. Whenever we do that, we have to move something, and even if it is just us moving. So the movement of atoms requires energy, right? That's very simple law of physics. And that energy has to come from somewhere. We know where it currently comes from, but it also doubles exponentially. It doubles every 30 years. So while there's some inflation and destruction of money going on between money and GDP, there's some efficiency gains going on between GDP and energy, but effectively they're linked and they're growing exponentially. Currently, we're burning through the equivalent of 100 billion barrels of fossil fuels per year. That roughly creates 19 terawatts, the 19 terawatt that we need as a continuous energy input for this whole thing to run, for the Sapiens mill to run. And if we're currently trying to tell ourselves a story that we move from a fossil energy regime into a minerals energy regime. If you look at, and let's invoke Stockdale here, ruthlessly realistic right now, the current state of technology and the known minerals and the places where those minerals are on our planet don't allow for that. They just don't. Just to give you an example, if we were to transfer all of the vehicles, for example, and the infrastructure that is needed to do that into an electric vehicle fleet, we would need roughly 4.7 billion tons of copper. Now, in the last 6,000 years, we've mined 700 million tons of copper. In the next 30 years, we're planning to mine 900 million. We're still short 3.1 billion. Well, they exist in nodules on the seafloor. But if we start grabbing those, we will release an untold amounts of carbon by disturbing the carbon sink on the ocean floors. So that's a no-go, right? So for some of us, that's a possibility. And then finally, we could say, let's go geothermal, or I'm pretty sure that we could innovate our way out of this with fusion, something like that. Well, even though fusion feels a bit like getting on a plane that has a 50-50% of possibility of crashing, and a pilot informing you that she will fix this in midair, it'll just postpone the problem. Because the waste heat of those processes, especially with an exponential growth path, will just exacerbate the problem for future generations. We'll cook the planet in 300 years. And I don't want to play a part in this, to be honest, not knowing that this is something that we can avoid. And this is, once we go into the radically optimistic part of the story, you will see how this is possible. So now, why don't we just change this? Well, we don't change it because both the economy and politics measure their success by measuring GDP, either directly or indirectly. And they are both trapped in a short-term optimization cycle that forces them to stay within this game because of competitive dynamics. And these are true intranationally and internationally. So this really is the high-level reductionist perspective on the Sapiens mill as an analogy to the ant mill. Of course, this is much more complex, and we could dive into many, many more aspects of this, but this is our offer to give this thing a picture that we're, okay, where should we go? Well, again, out of our conversations, we have synthesized something we today call the heliogenic civilization. And this is the radically optimistic picture that we're sharing today. And bear in mind, this might feel and sound a bit weird, just like it might have felt and sounded a bit weird to mechanical compute engineers as the first tube engineers emerged. Okay. I think it's safe to agree that we all get in touch with our inner self, and like Charles Eisenstein would say, imagine a more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. The GDP is not the right thing to put at the center of things. We put it to you that life should be the thing at the center. If we don't put life at the center, we're probably wrong. Life begets life. There's no life without life, right? Now let's look at how life has been running itself for the last couple of billion years. Effectively, it is the biggest circular economy we can think of. It uses and reuses more or less 6 atoms and dries itself by the 172,000 terawatts that the big fusion reactor in the sky is sending it. Now that completely dwarfs our current modality of operation to a state of ridiculousness. Now, what if we could use these ideas and these processes of nature to create a materials economy? Well, it turns out, if you look at the science, and not only the science, actually many projects out there that are already doing this, you will notice that already almost the entire material stack for a successful civilization is growable. But growing stuff comes with a different set of principles than producing stuff, mining stuff locally, extracting. The primary principle here is that it is easy to copy and it grows exponentially instead of depleting or being, so you cannot control it. Some of you here might like kombucha, and I like using that as an example for this because kombucha is fermented by a thing we call SCOBY, a piece of symbiosis of fungi and microorganisms. And once a week, your SCOBY doubles in size. And again, a doubling in a discrete time frame is an exponential growth path. And if I were to share my SCOBY with you next week, and then everybody in our line would do the same thing for the next 7 weeks, everybody on the planet would have a SCOBY. That's how powerful this is. Okay, this might sound scary from the perspective of a current economic model, but let's not forget something. There's a part of our economy, actually it makes up 15% of global GDP, which we call the digital economy. That wasn't around 25 years ago, but the internet was around before that. It just had different names. And it was accessible as text on your television. Similar special purpose devices, Minitel, BTX. They had different names in different countries, but nobody really used it. It wasn't fun. Until Berkeley put out the Unix operating system, or Bell Labs really, and then Berkeley. And then Tim Berners-Lee, put out the World Wide Web standards, both for free, a gift. And on top of this open and free foundation, people started exploring and playing, and it exploded into something entirely new. And now imagine you could do the same thing for the materials economy. Already you can run a free operating system on your computer, but imagine what it would mean if in 50 years you could just grow your computer as well, or grow your house. All right. Now, what would that mean? This would mean radical sovereignty for individuals and collectives. This doesn't mean that everybody will do everything. Just like today, not everybody is running a Unix operating system on their computer. We don't want to do that. It's cumbersome, right? Just as it is cumbersome to grow the inputs to your house. So there will be a strong economy. We estimate about 1,000 times bigger than today's economy, but in balance with nature and with humans, based on this sovereignty, based on the open and free foundation. Now, this allows something really, really beautiful. This allows us to move away from our current limited notion of money into a holistic understanding of money. We could call that the care economy. Now, to really get a grip on that, I would like to do a little excursion into something my mentor in all things money taught me about 20 years ago. His name was Bernard Lietaer. Bernard had been head of the central bank in Belgium and the architect or one of the architects of the introduction of the euro. And I met him in a meeting with Ernst Welteke, who was at the time still the head of the central bank in Germany. And they wanted to create a new currency somewhere in Germany. And my head was blown because I couldn't understand how these two high finance people could just do that. And Bernard went on to explain all of that to me. And he loved using this example of the city of Ghent in Belgium. City of Ghent had an issue with a part of town that was largely inhabited by illegal immigrants. And because they were illegal, they didn't have access to proper jobs, they couldn't get proper housing, etc. And it went into a downward spiral like these situations usually do, with substance abuse, violence, desolation, etc. Nobody knew how to fix this. Bernard went in and he asked the people about their dream. What's your dream? And the response was the majority wanted a piece of land to grow something, grow flowers, salads, whatever. So he got a piece of land ready from the town and he made it accessible, rentable, with a special token, money. And that kind of currency was earnable by doing things that were conducive to a positive environment in the neighborhood. So being nice to your neighbors would earn you money. Putting flowers in the windows, cleaning the house, fixing the street, etc. And in next to nothing, the situation turned. And in Bernard's mind, and it took me years to really understand this, and only in the context of the heliogenic civilization, I really can understand it. In Bernard's mind, he had this dream of a global central bank of dreams. A central bank in which everybody would deposit their dream of life. And then if somebody created something to make this dream stronger, that would mint new currency. But nobody can buy anything with Thomas currency because only a few people have Thomas currency, right? But that's because nobody needs to buy anything, because we would then live in a gift economy. We fulfill each other's dreams. We don't need money. Now, this sounds really, really far off, and I want to invoke Stockdale again. Radically optimistic in the long term. This is far away. Let's say 50 years, 100 years. But it is not impossible. And why do we know that? Because past civilizations, they didn't barter. That's a myth. They lived in a gift economy already. Okay. And then finally, what might happen to politics? Partisan, ideology-based politics could have the ability to change into politics of agency. This means that, yes, there can be different perspectives on how to achieve a goal, but this means that the people of a given region agree on the goal together. And then they can still fight over how to best achieve that goal. But we're currently navigating without triangulation. We don't know where we are going. And that's a huge issue. So long term is missing. Now, given this radically optimistic long-term model, there's a lot of work to do to get there. But we can choose now between two kinds of work. We can choose between the work that we have to do, that we are forced to do if we don't take action, because the collapse of the system, of the current system, which is optimized towards turning nature into waste and humans into zombies at increasingly higher speeds, is going to break. That system is going to break. And the fallout will not be fun. So we can do that work, or we can do the work of building towards and up into a heliogenic civilization. And this is what we call infrastructures of generosity. And this is what this meeting and the following meetings, which will be held at this time every week from now on, will be about: showing, highlighting, exposing projects that are already in the world, that are already building infrastructures of generosity. Why do we call them infrastructures of generosity? Because have to navigate between the horizon one of the current economic model and be feasible within that, but bridging into the heliogenic civilization horizon three model. That's a difficult thing to do, and it requires a lot of different modalities. That's why we call them infrastructures of generosity. So again, we're looking at economy of extraction to an economy of abundance and sovereignty. Right? A reminder that we have invented all of this together. We don't need an economy that turns nature into waste, right? We want to live. We also don't need energy. We need all sorts of other things. We need material, temperature, light, and movement, effectively. There are other ways of doing this. The big fusion reactor in the sky is helping us with that. Also, as I just at length described, we don't need money. We need all sorts of other things, but we don't need money. And then finally, we don't really need politics, right? We need to agree on what a good life is and then have disputes, arguments, and then agreements about how to get there. And ultimately, this is why you are here. We don't have answers. We're just some stewards that put together a long journey and things we learned from the brightest minds of our planet into this story. And it's up to us all to build this. But this is why today is an invitation to join that story. There are many things we can do here. If you feel called to contribute with whatever your strength is, please reach out to us and join us. We will continuously start opening Heliogenesis IO to more interaction. And we will build things like, for example, the projects that we will be highlighting in the next weeks and months to come. We will use that material to train large language models that help us get a deeper understanding, for example. So if somebody here feels compelled to doing so, join us. If you know of projects that are working towards the heliogenic civilization, or you think they do, let us know. Or if you want to, let us know you want to host sessions yourself and contribute to the creation of a large inspirational pool of knowledge and projects that are already built in this.